It's just like a big game at the beginning. You get a young man at 20. It's adventurous, really, isn't it? You know, you wonder what's around the corner. Like. When we landed, there was. I always remember the part important for me was the first wagon that went off. The bows opened up on the boat, and the first wagon down, you know, as I say, drove in the water, and that was a big wagon and trailer, and it just seemed to, it seemed to go about 6 foot, you know, to me, like. And old Major shouted like to the naval officer, said, "Couldn't you get it a bit nearer?" He said, "You know, for these wagons." As we drove up, these German prisoners, like, they were a bit aggressive, started spitting and swearing to us in the German tongue. We let the side window down and give them a blast, like, you know. And they just simply drove the wagon at them because it was either that or stalled in the soft sands, you know. But when you got to Fallage Gap, the stink, you know, the smell of death, like, was vile, you know. And I think that's what drew my attention that morning. Because we was going through Fallage Gap and could see these bodies. They were just on a wagon and trailer. It just looked like bags of sugar the way they had them stacked. And there was dead Germans, you know, well, presumed Germans. It wasn't our lads anyhow.
We meet this evening to remember the D-Day landings of 50 years ago and the men from many nations who sailed from many ports along our coast and the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. To those of you who took part in these events and have gathered here with us this evening, we greet you. But we also remember those who did not come back, but gave their lives in the struggle for freedom and right against the forces of injustice and oppression. We remember their sacrifice with gratitude and with thanksgiving. And in order that this sacrifice shall not have been in vain, we now unite with all people of goodwill in opposing the forces of evil, in praying that upon the reconciling love of God, there may be built a worldwide community where all acknowledge one another as true brothers and sisters, where war shall be no more, and in using our best endeavors of body, mind, and spirit to ensure the establishment of true justice and lasting peace.
And then at 6th of June, it would be about 1:30 or 2:30 in the afternoon, the commanding officer came on board and on deck, and he said, "Now boys, you're going to take part in the greatest operation ever in military history." And he said, "You're going to disembark at Abel Red Beach." I've never heard him mentioned Abel Red Beach, he said, not Go Beach, Abel Red Beach in Normandy. And he wish you all the best and all that, good luck and God bless and all that, you know. And whether it was the first night or second, I'm not sure, but a chap from Liverpool, Corporal or Sergeant Thomas, our vehicle had been put in a shell craters our artillery had made, naval bombard. And it went down in there, and just the top was showing out, you know, on level with ground level. And an aircraft come down, one of ours, on this landing strip, there's a landing strip, wasn't there? The landing strip was just waylaid down. Of course, we heard this thing coming down, and we all dove in this ditch, and he went straight over this ditch, over a lot of us, 5 or 6 lads, takes the top off this vehicle that was in this shell crater. And poor old Thomas was there, cut all over his head, and mouth bleeding and groaning. Never knew what happened to him, they never told us. Took him off to the field hospital, but we never know what happened. Whether he recovered or not, we don't know. Now that was the first night. Now the second night, we're going to scout round, you know how you do. I said, "This is way to the front," to these lads. dugouts and slit trenches. Our lads, of course. Is this way to the front? He says, aye. Where? Last time, next minute, shells and all sorts. Come back here, you daft fuck. I meant see from me. A young lad now, who's a gentleman, won't put him in his place. I'll go and sort this little out. You know, that's what we felt like. We thought we were off another planet, Germans. Not like they are today, you know, when you see them come. We thought they were beasts. We thought they wouldn't be the same shape as us and have beards on or something like that, you know. That's the impression you had when you were young in them days. But it was an experience I wouldn't have missed, really, although I'm sorry it had to happen. Defenders of the faith, they call it, don't they? Eh?
Look around the channel and the place was just dotted with ships. And there it was in one big armada sailing up for the French coast. Well, it was quite a rough crossing, although we got the word go because the weather was a little lighter. It wasn't that much, it was certainly quite rough. I don't think we enjoyed so much in meals aboard. We tried some soup, which came out of, I think plenty have heard about it now, the well-known self-heating cans of soup that we had. But the wicks that were heating them, they used to stink horribly. And I think that's one of the things that made me very sick over the side. It was Sword Beach where we landed. Some went into Weestrom, but our job was to get to the two bridges at Benneville, the well-known Pegasus Bridge as it's known today, and of course the Orme Bridge.
Let us remember before God those who did not return. Let us commend to his sure keeping all those who have died for their country in war, those who we knew and those whose memory we treasure, and for all who have lived and died in the service of their fellow men and women. Lord our God, in the midst of the sin and selfishness of our world and the evil of our divisions and hatreds, you set before us a vision of community and peace. We give you thanks for the men and the women of many nations who risked their lives for the sake of freedom and justice. Amen.
Harbour was full of boats of different types, and we embarked on this boat. It was a reasonable sized boat, a merchant boat, and we hung about, as I say, at that and hang about for it on there. And then on the 6th, we saw all the aircraft going over early on there, usually bombers and these things and everything else, gliders going over the lot, as we were sailing down the channel. But we were, in front of us was the whole, the sort of fleet. We were at the tail end. And when we arrived off Normandy and the bombardment started on the vessel, we took a position sort of behind the battleships at the back on the English side. We were held up on there waiting, and the landing went on, as you know, in the early morning, and we were still sitting out there in the sea, getting decidedly sick because we were just bobbing up and down in a bit long time. And eventually at night, when things had sort of quietened down, about the bombardment had eased off, although the naval guns were still firing salvos, but the other ones were sort of quiet. It was only the big ones that were firing. We moved off into a smaller boat and was transferred to the shore. And when you got to shore, it was a bit, there wasn't the activity with shells or anything. It was quiet, but it was littered with all sorts of burnt out vehicles and all husbands of damage to war. It just looked like a scrapyard. And the main thing was the medical teams that were running around and stretchers coming down and being taken off onto boats out to a hospital ship. It wasn't quite a bright sight to start off with, seeing all these casualties going off on there. But we got back up off the beach to a small sort of hollow thing, and there we were sort of kept in a little group of us, all of us. And then the following morning, we were divided up, and a sergeant came down and took charge of us, and there was about 10 of us. And he came down, and first thing he said to us was that, as all my friends, we were all wearing a white polar flash on our shoulders. We were all Durhams, but we had the white polar there for the 49th. And his first reaction was, "You can take them bloody things off." And issued us out with our new flashes, which was the 2 T's, being the Roman numeral for 25, so 2 T's made us up to 50. So we knew we were in the 50th Northumberland from the 49th West Riding Division.
The carnage on the beach was terrible. Bodies everywhere. The tanks coming ashore were running over the bodies. People and medics was trying to drag them under the cover of the sea wall. It was just absolutely shocking. We could do nothing. We had nothing. The only thing we could do was to try and get back to our headquarters, for we didn't know what to do. Eventually we got aboard a landing craft who took us back to the KG5. By this time it's evening time. We got aboard the KG5, dried off a bit, and we had the first hot drink we'd had since leaving the River Amble the day at 5 o'clock previously. While we was on the KG5, or shortly after, I can't remember every little detail that happened in between, but I do remember a troop shift came in. I think it would be at about 8 o'clock at night. Anyway, it was on the tide. This ship came in and it was loaded with troops. You could see them hanging over the side and everywhere. As soon as this dropped the anchor, as soon as the anchor hit the water, there was a terrific explosion and it blew half the ship apart. There was bodies everywhere, all floating like sacks of wheat on the tide, in and out, in and out. So many you could not count them. And while this carnage is going on, we have the barrages, the KG5, all the battleships and cruisers were firing, the occasional Messerschmitt coming over. The beach was under bombardment from Le Havre, the cliffs over Le Havre, machine guns. It was, as I say, undescribable.
But the funny thing about it, we never see an Englishman dead. The first one I see was in a Brengham carrier, and all these blades was hanging out. All the yellow matter, yellow and white, hanging out bloody terrible. She just covered them up with it. And then we found out later, all of our dead, we saw some dead out the beach, Germans, we couldn't see any English. But I see all these gas capes, you remember the gas capes you used to have? And I left in one of these gas capes, there were all ours were covered up with gas capes, that's why we couldn't see any.
And then what seemed like a typhoon, a tornado, hurricane all put together, the sound of shells, and they were coming over the top of us. And all the devastation that was being caused, the yellow flame, the black smoke, earth and trees and guns and vehicles and, needless to say, bodies as well flying in the air.
They shall grow not old, greater shall that grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. The going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them.
Well, I'm down about 5'10" and a half, and he's about 5 foot nothing, you know. And we're cleaning this farmhouse, and I'm on the gate, and they have the gun, the tripod, they had it over the gate and pulling it towards me, like sort of could give cover for our lot that had gone in cleaning the farm. And the blokes kept coming back and giving the password. We always had a password for it. And anyway, a few come back, and the next thing, this lone German appeared from nowhere, and he's shouting for his mates. And this Sergeant Kelly that's over us, I said, well, he was an Irish bloke, an Irish fella. And I said, Kelly, I said, let him have it, because he was equipped with a Sten gun. I mean, just a short burst and that was it. Let him get near, he said. So of course when he gets 5 yards away, he said, he's Irish brogue, he said, hey, you come here. And he just opened up with he had 2 Lugers, one in either hand, and he was a German officer, I found out after, just opened up. I got one through the throat, and Walker got one through the head, and same as I went down like a bag of soot. And there was plenty of snipers knocking about, and there was one up in a church steeple, and it was hell with them, and they didn't want to do anything, and he kept, like for case they damaged the bloody church and that. Anyway, they finally got him, but there was one and nobody knew where he was, and he was picking them off at random, and finally they located him, and he was up in a big tree. Well, it was full of leaves and that, and there was a platform there, telescopic sights and everything, and what they did, as soon as they found him, they got a tank there, flamethrower. Just went in, and anyway, leaves and everything he went, and he was there hung in the tree, black, and the glasses as he had on, what's the name, it was all melted and down side of his face, and he was just hung there. All you heard when he went in was a scream, and that was it. But after, when you seen him, he was in a hell of a mess.
I guess tonight we've come here for 2 reasons, really. To honour all that is good and true and noble in the human spirit, and to thank God for his faithfulness towards us over these past 50 years. There's a wonderfully modern saying, isn't there? When the going gets tough, the tough get going. But what is the nature of that toughness which characterized the D-Day landings and won for us such a wonderful victory? In 1944, the D-Day landings were the beginning of the end of tyranny and oppression in Europe. They came about because the world had come to see tyranny for what it was, in the person of Hitler and the Nazi Party and all that they were seeking to do, and determined to do something about it. So very ordinary people, like you and me, were put into soldiers' uniform and asked to do extraordinary things, which they did. I was listening to a program yesterday on the television, watching it, where a D-Day veteran was reminiscing that out of the group of 150 soldiers of which he was a member, when they eventually got to the shore finally, there were just 75 left. And they did this because of faith in their leadership, faith in the justice and righteousness of their cause, and they willingly, as it were, entered into the valley of the shadow of death with bullets and bombs landing either side of them, and did that believing that even though they die, yet at the end of it all, whether they lived or died, God would be with them and would safeguard their lives forever.
Drive straight through the centre of the Falaise Gap, which was the British had gone to the left and the Americans had come to the right, and they'd met at the back, and they'd made a complete encirclement of the German army. I don't know which army it was, but the division, the 50th, was given the job to drive right through the centre of the gap with responsibility for mopping up anybody that happened to be any enemy resistance in between, because the gap was getting smaller as they were pulling in, but we had to go in and flush them out. And our job was there. And as I say, I've never ever seen so much, really it was destruction is all I think. There's never been so much destruction in a concentrated place in a life. I mean, you're going past rows of convoys of vehicles knocked out, and loads of the German army used a lot of horses to do their transport, and guns and stuff like this, and guides, and all these horses were all laid out, you know, killed, dead, with legs up in the air, mutilated with shells and everything. It was, and the smell of death was really, you know, really, it's a mixture of a smell of death and the smell of cordite in the air. This feeling, I mean, you felt sick going along. I mean, you were sick from the smell as well as the sights that you saw of, because nobody had been through to clean up for the German casualties. They just simply lay where they'd fallen, and that wasn't our job. We had nothing to do with that. That was for the Graves Commission, which followed behind, and didn't envy their job one little bit.
And there's a French Canadian, he must have been scavenging round the area, and he must have picked this, what was a phosphorus grenade up. I can see him now. All his skin peeled off, and his arms peeled off, skin peeled off. When he's walking along, his skin was hanging down as though it was a big woman's glove. Of course, we wrapped him up in a blanket and off to the field hospital. Still don't know how Brad don't think he lived that long. Now that was calm. Now after that was Falaise Gap. Now, have you heard about the Falaise Gap? That's where he started retreating off like hell. That was a terrible sight. And the worst sight of that for me was the dead animals, cows and horses with the feet up it there. Terrible. Thousands of dead and littered with tanks and half tracks. The Germans had half tracks. Our equivalent was a brain carrier. And and one, I'll never forget, we're going through Falaise Gap, what they call it. We come to a big notice on a big wooden placard of some sort, painted in whitewash. Keep your swords and head down, you're under observation from the enemy, you see. Get a move on and keep your swords and head down. Written on this bloody board, you know.
But one time when I was just having a chat in the farmyard with a couple of lads from the commando, and they were bringing some prisoners in at the bottom of the farmyard. We would just casually watch them, searching them, interrogating them and stuff. And my officer came from our little quarters, the little corner of the farmyard that we called our own. It was just a little woodshed affair that we was set up in, you know. He came dashing out, shouted me over, he wanted me for something, and I said, oh, I'll see lads, see what he wants. I dashed over to see, and I no sooner reached him than there was this mighty explosion behind me. Looked across, and those two lads I'd been talking to, they were on the ground. Other lads were rushing to them, and I was rushed off with my officer. I forget what it was now all about, but I can't forget there was two lads lying on the ground. And I think that I might have been there with them only for them calling me over.
A body is just looked upon as though it's happened, unless you actually know who it is. And thank God it's not me.
Gospel of St John. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever remains in me, and I in him, will bear much fruit, for you can do nothing without me. Whoever does not remain in me is thrown out like a branch and dries up. Such branches are gathered up and thrown into the fire, where they are burnt. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, then you will ask for anything you wish, and you shall have it.
But he seemed to be playing a game because we met, I should say, dozens of chaps who were known in different, who were in the South Lancs with us and had gone to different regiments. And the game seemed to be the same. They'd let you advance so far and then come round both sides, which is what they did with us. And he seemed to be just grabbing prisoners. For what reason, I don't know, because they had to feed and see to them. Right, the other two, our platoon was completely captured, the other two got shot to pieces. And this seemed, as I say, seemed to be the policy they were using. Even with tanks, there was a friend of mine who was a tank sergeant, met him in the field over the camp. They gone them the same way, let them get through so far, and then came round and surrounded them.
Well, I lived in a hole in the ground. It was lined with gun cases, empty gun cases, to support the sides and just a roof over and the brushwood on top. And we only went out at night, shall we say. Trucks were we didn't have we had a few vehicles with us, and those we had, we dug them into the ground. So then shrapnel, we dug them in. So then shrapnel burst, wouldn't get the engine, wouldn't. We took all the canopies off and everything else. And, but at night, we had the job. See, it became more static towards the end. And it was more or less trench warfare. And so what they decided upon was that they lay defensive rows of mines in front of our trenches. We had our dugouts and trenches, then with a couple of rows of barbed wire, and at certain intervals with passages through the wire. So we used to go, the infantry patrol used to come out with us. They'd go out first and pinpoint where the passages through the wire were, then stay handy about while we passed through and went on with our mine laying. And the first night we went out, actually we had to locate the end of the mine which had been laid on the other next sector. So we're crawling along in front of the wire, feeling our way as we went through, and suddenly a voice challenged us, a Scotch voice. He shouted the password for that night, and we had to reply. So which we did. And he said, "Who the bloody hell are you?" He said, "Engineers looking for the end of the minefield." He says, "You're almost bloody well in it." So we said, "Thank you very much." So we don't know who he was. He must have been a lookout or a sniper getting ready for the morning, because each side had its sniper positions where if anybody did appear, the sniper was waiting for them. So we said, "Thank you very much." We had to speak in very low whispers because you could hear the Germans talking in the trenches on the other side, so they must have been able to hear us as well.
We were on 14-man pack rations, hard tack really, all tins and biscuits. Yanks had bread baked on the 7th day. They brought their own kitchens over. They were feeding them well. We never saw bread till we were POWs. And even then it was black. Horrible stuff. But you know the French law, which tapers off. Well, imagine trying to divide that up into 12 equal pieces, because you got thin at the end. Work of art. There were more fights over that than anything else. Amongst our old men. They used to draw lots after they cut it up. I don't want to do it again.
Gracious God, for all who suffer as a result of war, for the injured and disabled, for the mentally distressed, for those whose faith in God or man has weakened or destroyed, let us pray to the Lord.
Anyway, came home on leave, 6 days leave. Well, the first obstacle we had, I was a Catholic.
No, I'm not.
So we went to Sacred Heart Church, St Helens, and we had to get a dispensation. So we got married on the Saturday eventually, and you went back on the Monday, didn't you?
Monday or Tuesday.
Monday or Tuesday, yeah.
Wasn't long after.
And then from there, I had a telegram, July, I think it was, August, missing, believed, killed. And of course then you had to, we were working and there was no time off. You know, you just had to carry on working. Well, I'd just come in from work when I received it. So, well, I just went to pieces.
And then you had to go and tell my mum, hadn't you?
Yes. And his mum broke down. Obviously, being an only child, that was, you know, our worst, wasn't it? Yeah. And every day seemed like a year, wondering.
Lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead us from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, our world, our universe.
I think it was in the October, in the factory, word come through on the top. Tannoy. Wilfred Chorley, prisoner of war. Of course, all the machines stopped. People were waving and somebody brought a bottle of wine out, you know, and we started cheering. So that was the happy time.
See, on D-Day, the sky was black with Dakotas towing gliders, airborne troops. Several of them we saw shot down, all full of troops. I don't know how many got killed on D-Day, but on the beaches where I was involved, there was hundreds and hundreds of bodies, tanks running over bodies. Possibly some were not even dead when they was run over. You don't know. Then they're floating in and out on the tide, like blooming sacks. Young men, 20 years of age. It's indescribable. 90% of the people who took part in that assault said, well, this is curtains.
And the shelling started again, but from another direction. Surely Jerry's not got it back of us. Commando officers came dashing over to us. What's going on? They thought we were. I said, we're not fighting at all. They couldn't understand. These shells were mostly going over the farmhouses. in the same direction as our shells had, but they were a little bit lower, and some of them were catching the rooftops of the barns and the buildings of the farm that the commander was all housed in. And these soon got shattered, all the tiles and shrapnel flying all over the place. There was screams and it was real terror. The number of men that were being killed and dying, all over the farmyard. They were rushing out of these buildings with injuries and such, and nobody could do nothing about it. We were all cringing down where we could, and I know me in particular, I never prayed so much in all my life. We certainly took a pasting. But where did it all come from? We could only draw our own conclusions. Certainly wasn't from the Germans. These things do happen, and it would have seemed that our own artillery ashore now, and they were a little bit low. But this is war, and accidents will happen. It's one of those things. But it meant that night that 2/3 of 6 commanders were wiped out or badly injured. Yes. I went to pay a pilgrimage there in the 3rd week of April. And the village or the farm, it hadn't changed one bit. I was pleased to see a memorial in the centre of the village green near the church to the complete brigade. The brigade, it was Lord Lovett's 1st SS Brigade, of which we were part of. Of course, also was number 3 Commando, 4 Commando, as well as 6, and also 45 Marine Commando. And then there was a small contingent, number 10 Commando, which was inter-allied under a French commander, Kuiper, who initially went into Weestrum with 4 Commando. And so this memorial was commemoration to all the brigade there. But as we approached the farm, and there it was in the corner, same it was 50 years ago, except that it had a roof repose. Alice remembered it with all the roofs shattered, with memories of all those men. It brought back a flood of memories. But we ventured inside the farmyard and expected to see a big dog come bounding at us, you know what farms are. However, I looked through the windows of the farmhouse and he saw me. Yes, there was the farmer, and he came out. Unfortunately, he was having hip trouble and was hobbling along on hip crutches. But when I made myself known, and he gave us a hearty welcome. He did. Shook hands, bonjour, monsieur. And he took us in his kitchen. And he gave us coffee. And in a way, trying to understand each other, it was a little difficult with sign language and one or two other things. We managed to have a bit of a conversation about old times. He laced the coffee up with Calvados, and that nearly blew my drinking head off. But he welcomed us wholeheartedly, and it would seem that he does that quite often.
In one of the daily papers, there was a cartoon, and Jane usually appeared with virtually nothing on. And of course there was always a rush to buy
the
this
men
paper.
in the morning at the factory were queuing up to... Jane appeared in, I think it was the Daily Mirror, and they would queue up for an hour if they could get hold of the paper with Jane in.
I know at Dover we used to dash down to the gate there waiting for him coming. The papers. Only for Jane. We didn't want the rest of it.
At 19 years of age, and I was asked if I would do it, I would have done it again, yes. It was an experience, and comradeship, everything else that we found between each other. And originally there were 3 companies in St Helens and an HQ company, so it'd be about 900 St Helens men in the Royal Engineers who went to war in September, October 1939. All billeted at Croppers Hill at the time. When they landed on D-Day, we all heaved a sigh of relief. We knew that it was the beginning of the end.
May the sun who brings light to the darkest valley heal your hurts and share your burdens. May the Holy Spirit, who has always breathed life and hope where there is chaos and despair, renew you in soul and spirit for the day to come. The blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be amongst you and your homes and your families and all those whom you love this day and even forevermore. Amen.
And from there, I got him up. Wiser man, eh? Lot of pals. Well, I'm not saying a lot. 20 or so out of 160, which was not a lot really, was it? I wouldn't do it again.
And I remember us coming up the Mersey on this ship, and I don't know what people in Merseyside must have thought. The ship came up the Mersey hanging with huge German flags with the things held down with gym slippers to give them the weight, swastikas flying all over the place, and boardies shouting all over the place, and we anchored off the pier head all day.
Well, this is war. And of course this is still going on all over the world. Atrocities. But I don't think that you'll ever see another D-Day invasion as it was. Planned. Every man had his job to do. Every man did his job. Nobody else's. Like I said, when we were going across in the boat, all these men in the water, we could have quite easily stopped and picked them up, easy. I could have touched them with my hand, but we wasn't allowed to stop. If we had have done, who knows what we may have caused at the rear. At the back of the invasion fleet was rescue craft, supposedly. Whether there was or not, I don't know.
What do you want now? Double 6, and I'm going to get it this time. Good shot. That's a bottle of beer I owe you. That's 3 bottles you owe me now. Colin St Helens. Hello, Lizzie, darling. Hope you and the babies are keeping well. I'm receiving your mail okay, and I hope you're receiving mine. Give my love to Mother and all at home. Love to Joan, Brian and Kevin. God bless you all. Chins up. Keep smiling.
The buses took us from the town hall, St Helens, to Napier, because the men in the factories hated our guts. The elderly men, they'd served the time, you know, to engineering, and we were the young ones checking their work, which you imagine they, you know, didn't like. But eventually they got used to it. But it was a matter of working, 84 hours a week on average.
But in war, life is so cheap, it's cheaper than a bullet.